from Provo's social advocates and philanthropists. You'll meet women who are changing the face of Provo with their passion for personal and professional projects, which is really exciting. I'm Amy Jensen, and I'm a member of the Provo Women's Day Committee. And there are some others that are involved in the committee too. And some of them are still coming, but if they're here, I'm hoping that they'll stand. Emma Bowers, Whitney Booth, Whitney's right back there. Is Emma in here? Liz Paxman, who can't be here today. Casey Faulkner, there's Casey. And Sherry Walker, who will be coordinating some of the afternoon events. We're going to kick off the morning with a little bit more mingling and networking, and so we're going to take about 15 more minutes. We're really grateful for the breakfast from Marvelous Catering, and we'd also like to thank our amazing sponsor, Swire Coca-Cola. They've sponsored the breakfast this morning, and without their sponsorship, none of this would be possible. If you are interested in Wi-Fi, you should know that the network password is Provo Guest. The network ID is Provo Guest, and the password is also Provo Guest. And those are listed at the bottom of your program. At about 9:15, we're going to hear from Mayor Kafusi. She'll welcome us, and she'll do some introductions, and she'll introduce the lecture series and then our keynote speaker. So take about 15 more minutes, and then we'll hear from Mayor Kafusi.
I almost hate to interrupt all the chatter because I love it. That's what we do, right? We talk, we multitask, and we get more done than anyone else because we have it in it, our skill set. We can get a lot done and visit at the same time, which I love. Welcome to International Women's Day. Everywhere around the world, people are celebrating women today. You think it might just be unique to Provo? It's not. It is a worldwide celebration all around the world in multiple countries. Countries in small communities in Africa are celebrating today, the women. This is just a day to celebrate. And so thank you for being here. I'm Mayor Kafusi, for those of you that don't know, and I am the mayor of Provo. And I am the first female mayor of Provo. So So if you want to peek at my friends up on my wall as I walk into my office, there's 44 handsome, stellar men. And then now there's an L. So we're getting closer, progress. When I became the mayor of Provo, this was one of my platforms I really wanted to emphasize and go out on, and that is empowering women. Empowering women from the time they are small, that they have the capability and the strength and the support to get involved and do anything they set their minds to. So that is some of the reason we started this and got this going, and it's been going for a few years now, and I've noticed around the city and other places and other cities in the state of Utah have picked up on this. I was asked to speak at multiple Women's Days today, and I was like, are you kidding me? We do our own. I am staying here in Provo to speak because these are my people. I want to just read a few things. First of all, there are multiple events going on today. It started this morning at 8:30 and it ends tonight at 10:30, or maybe 11 if we're having too much fun. We might push it a little. But feel free to get on our website and look. There's something for everyone. We have yoga going. We have an event for children, and every single event is free. So please don't hesitate and get on and find what sings to your heart and get out and enjoy yourselves today. I want to talk just a little bit about, because Provo is known for being one of the most charitable cities in the whole country. And speaking of charity, how many of you have seen the great murals around Provo that we've started and put up in the past year? Aren't they fun? We are so thrilled about this mural program we started, and we thought we'd try and draw some attention to it. And so what we came up with was we are going to highlight our murals. This is our first mural we're putting on a shirt, and we're doing a unique collection of these. This is the mural over by Google Fiber on the wall by the Convention Center, and it states, "One time in Provo." We are doing this because I can't do anything without tying it to some type of a foundation, some charitable foundation. I want you to know that all the proceeds from buying these shirts are going to go to our Housing First Fund, which is a nonprofit that helps get people from being homeless, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, eventually in a home and self-sustainable. It's sponsored by United Way, who is also a great partner of Provo. Their main office is just around the corner, and we love Bill Holterstrom. And they're just on sale, and I hate charging, but I'll charge when it's for a good purpose. And all the money from these t-shirts will go to that. And they're for sale just right around the corner at our customer service. I want to talk about just one more thing. I love Provo Women's Day and all it stands for. And so I thought, what was something else we could add? Something that's kind of one of the fun things about being the mayor is you can kind of frame this day. And something I'm passionate about is reading. Reading changed my life. I was hyperactive. My teacher used to tell my mom, she's a social butterfly. We have to staple her to her seat. I remember all these statements when I was going through elementary school at parent-teacher conferences, them saying. And then I had a third grade teacher that introduced me to a book and said, "Michelle, why don't you go home and read this book? And I'll give you an extra 5 minutes at recess if you can get this book read in the weekend." It was entitled Noisy Nancy Norris. And it was a game changer for me. I still have the book. I read that book in the weekend. I not only read it once, but I read it 3 times in the weekend. It was something that gave me a focus where I could take my energy and focus and come out feeling good. And Noisy Nancy Norris changed my life. I'm an avid book reader. I used to read 3 and 4 heavy novels a month. With my new job over the past year and a half, it's cut down a little. But something I've done is I thought, how can I keep reading but still work really hard as being the mayor? So I brought it into the city. I am on my 2nd book reading with my city employees and my directors. We read, our first book was Be Our Guest by Walt Disney. We have taken that and put it into the way we do things in the city. You're not our customer. You're not a citizen. When you come in my office or any office in the city, you are a guest. And that's how we will treat you. And I've implemented that, and everyone has read it, and we're really trying to promote that. Right now we're reading Leadership in Troubled Times, a little more heavy book. But that's the beauty of it, because I can still read, and yet it's part of work. We have book discussions. It's great. But what we did was we have this bookmark, and we're going to hand them out to you. I hope you look through the bookmark for suggestions on what to read. There are a lot of categories, but you still pick the book you want. On the back, you'll see that there's a way for you to win $25 worth of a gift card to Pioneer Book, our dear friends Pioneer Book right across the street. If you complete the list of 22 books, submit your name on the ProvoWomen'sDay.com website to enter. You'll see other recommendations, and I'd like to offer you a couple books that I've read that also really were impactful. One that I read years ago, and I loved it, and my girlfriend read it with me that's here, The Poisonwood Bible. That's just one of my all-time favorites by Barbara Kingsolver. And I have gone back and read that a couple times. That book just impacted me. I don't know if it's because I was a mother at the time and had 5 little children running around, but it's a story of a family that goes to the Congo and raises their children there. It's a fantastic book. And then I thought, what's the most recent book I read? And so the most recent book, I just finished it last month, was Where the Crawdad Sings by Delia Owens. It's a fantastic book as well. When they asked me, pick your favorite books, I literally started spewing out so many. They told me, easy, Mayor, easy. And I actually went home. I have a cherished bookcase at my house where I keep all my books. It's filled. They're stuffed everywhere. Like you can't, like to pull a book out, 10 are going to fall out because I have all my books there. I love books. They're a great thing. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to implement it today. And now my hair's eating my sticker. So join us with this book reading club. We're going to come together. We're going to read books. We're going to talk about them. We're going to partner with Pioneer Book throughout the year and have a lot of fun. So now to start our lecture series for International Women's Day, and Provo's Women's Day brings together amazing women of this city. We are going to hear from some truly remarkable women today. Each one of them has done outstanding things and are role models to me. First, we're going to hear from Dr. Astrid Tumenez, president of Utah Valley University. Many of you know her. I mean, she is, honestly, she just makes me smile. I'm totally going to go off script because when she called me from Singapore shortly after she became the president, and just this little energetic ball of fire over the phone. And then when I went out and met with her when she arrived in Utah, same thing. And I remember talking to her and thinking for a second, looking at her and thinking, I remember President Holland sitting in that chair, but it seemed so much bigger. And Astrid leans over, we had him cut the legs off because I'm so short. And it's just who she is. She's got such a great sense of humor. We are so lucky to have her. But let me just give you a little bit of a background on her. She's the 7th president of Utah Valley University. In 2018 is the institution's first female president, which we're so proud of her for being the first female president. Dr. Tumenez brings to UVU a broad and rich experience in academia, philanthropy, technology, and business. Born in a farming village in the Philippine province of Iloilo, Jimenez moved with her parents and 6 siblings to the slums of Iloilo City when she was 2 years old, her parents seeking better education opportunities for their children. Her pursuit of education eventually took her to the United States, to our own Brigham Young University. I mean, when you hear her story of how she landed here, it's fantastic. Where she graduated summa cum laude in 1986 with a bachelor's degree in international relations and Russian literature. She earned a master's degree from Harvard University in Soviet Studies in 1988 and a PhD from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Political Science in 1996. Before assuming her current position, President Jimenez was a world leader in the fields of technology and political science, and most recently serving as an executive at Microsoft, where she led corporate, external, and legal affairs in Southeast Asia. Dr. Jimenez is also the former Vice Dean of Research and Assistant Dean of Executive Education at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, National University of Singapore, the premier school of public policy in Asia. She and her husband, Jeffrey S. Tolk, have 3 children. In her spare time, she enjoys running, dancing, and martial arts. And she resides in Provo, of course. I'm so thrilled to have her here. And as I was telling everyone how excited we were to have her, I just kept saying, come, you will not be disappointed. She is worth coming out in a snowstorm for. And I want you all to get comfortable, sit back. You're in a safe place. You're amongst friends here. So come and enjoy our lecture series today. Astrid.
Hello? 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 I had to use a higher pitched voice. I was going to start singing good morning to you. So thank you so much, Mayor Kafusi, for the generous introduction. And it is wonderful to start my day with a group of women and some men. We have 2 men. My Chief of Staff, Justin Jones, back there. Yay. And also we have really young kids. Welcome. You are going to be mayors and governors. So it's great to be here. And I was thinking sitting down that there was one lie in that biography there, in her spare time. That's a lie. So there is no spare time. I've been president for nearly 6 months now, and I'm going to try to speak for about 20 minutes and then have question and answer with you. But thank you for having me here. So I started out, as was mentioned, this picture was taken last June by a Utah Valley University team that went out to see the actual village where I was born. And we got there, and my second cousin's husband was in the rice field plowing this field with a water buffalo. And I turned to the UVU crew and I said to them, this is not staged. This is the real thing. So I was born in this village, and then my family moved to the city because, where do I point? Okay, sorry, go back there. My family moved to the city when I was 2 years old. That's me there. This is my neighborhood, and these boats would come from the island across the way where my mother was from, and I thought we had a really beautiful hut. Many of the huts in the squatters were kind of built sloppily, but because I had relatives who were farmers and from real villages, it's even really artistic when you think about how they used bamboo. And so this is where I started, and what really changed my life, and which kind of makes UVU such a logical place for me, is that there. When I was 5 years old, nuns, Catholic nuns from the Daughters of Charity, were doing service work in my neighborhood, and they found me and my siblings and my mom, and they invited us to attend their school for free. This nun, Sister Elvira Correa, who is now in her 60s, was back then in her 20s, a very beautiful young nun, and we kind of worshiped them. Their habits didn't look like this at all. They were very complicated, multi-layered with a giant rosary, went all the way down to the floor. Now, their wimples were very tight. You couldn't see a single strand of hair. And as a little girl, I thought they used to like walk on clouds, these white figures. And we all wanted to be nuns. All of us wanted to be nuns. And we were going to be more obedient than Maria in Sound of Music. So this was the pivot that changed my life. I was illiterate when they found me, and but at the same time, the illiteracy was obviously overcome by going to school. But I also think that foundationally, I came from a family that had dreams. Even though we were in that little hut, I had older sisters who had what I call the high standards. They would take a coconut husk and wax the bamboo floor till it shone. My sisters always told me to be clean and don't cuss, even though everyone in the squatters, talked like that. And my father was a guide for American soldiers during World War II. And so he spoke English with every cuss word you could imagine. And my mother, this is her when she was probably 16. This is her just about a week ago in California with my sister. My sister made her that new dress. I actually didn't know my mother very well. She left when I was 5 years old. And my older sister, who was 15 years old, raised me. But my mother was the one who moved us from the village. She knew what that life was like, how hard it was. She was pregnant with all these children, no health care, no medical care. And she would hire herself out as a laborer to harvest rice. She would be 6 months, 7 months, 8 months pregnant and would be doing that kind of back-breaking work. And she decided, it wasn't what she wanted for 6 daughters. She had 1 son, but 6 daughters. So I'm grateful to her. And once my education opened up, I think critically my brain just kind of exploded, because learning to read, learning numbers, and I really didn't know numbers well. I thought a 0 was 100. So when all my zeros came in, I thought I was really smart, and then somebody had to tell me 100 is what you want. So I want to tell a little story. When I started school, in Asia, our culture can be all about shaming. And in that classroom, the girls were seated based on intelligence, or what the teacher determined as our intelligence. The first seat, first row, was the smartest girl. Her name was Rosemary. And the last seat, last row, would be the dumbest girl, and that was me. And so, but it awakened in me, a certain competitive spirit, which is probably very important for girls and young women. I was so ashamed to be in that 6th seat, 6th row, and I would keep looking at that Rosemary in the first seat, first row. And once I figured out letters and numbers, I was unstoppable. In a few months, I was in the first seat, first row. So it felt really good to win. So one of these things that I learned early on in life is, if you discover something you're good at, compete and win, it feels really, really, really good. Last night, UVU men's basketball beat the best funded team in our conference, Grand Canyon. Our funding is 38% of theirs. Could you please applaud? And we won that game 72-60, and you should have seen me jumping all over the court. They had president, don't do that. So education changed the trajectory of my life, and my family was a big factor, and then my faith. I was raised Catholic. We prayed to the Virgin Mary all the time. We really worshiped a female deity for all intents and purposes. And then I became a Latter-day Saint. And again, it gave me a very different view. Whereas as a Catholic, I thought a lot about, sin and maybe flagellating myself, because there's a lot of that in Catholicism. But then Mormonism kind of was all, you're a child of God. You can be anything. And so it was a great kind of combination of the foundational faith. But I think at the bottom of that for me was the question of how do I live my life? What choices do I make? How do I choose good? It really was, as a 10-year-old, it really was something I thought about a lot. How do I choose good? How do I do good for others? And the nun schooled me in that thing about, a young nun, another nun, asked me early on in our Christian living class, that's what it was called. She said to me, Astrid, you have to see God in every person. And I have never forgotten that line, that I must see God in every person. And that has informed my entire journey of leadership, that I must see the divine and the eternal in every person that I interact with. So I'm sure you like this one. I think that's the BYU Library, Harold B. Lee. And you recognize the quarterback here? I mean, am I the oldest person in the room? Come on. So I came to the United States. Provo was my America. And I'm like, why do they allow men to kill each other like that on the field? And the cops aren't coming to stop them, and they're just banging one another. That is so wrong. And then someone had to explain football to me, and I started enjoying it. But but it was an amazing time because also materially my life changed. I had electricity 24 hours a day. I had running water 24 hours a day. So the things we take for granted in Provo, Utah, not everybody in the world has that. And when people ask me, was it difficult to study? I thought, when you have electricity 24 hours a day, there's nothing difficult. There's light, so you can actually read and study. And I had mentors here. I found mentors at Brigham Young University in my major, especially in Russian literature, reading Dostoevsky, reading Tolstoy, reading Chekhov, and really, again, trying to grapple with what life is all about. The great novelists knew how to bring these issues up. So BYU was awesome. And after that, I went and did my master's, as Mayor Kafusi mentioned. And I lived in New York City. Well, I lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts for 7 years, and then New York City for 13 years. And the evolution, since this is sort of adventures in female leadership, in my PhD program, it was really hard. There were there were only 2 or 3 female faculty tenured, and the most senior wouldn't give me the time of day. I hope generationally that we are better now, that women are lifting other women and mentoring other women. It was really hard for me. And even later in New York, when I worked on Wall Street, there was only one other woman with an office besides myself. Everybody was on the trading floor. And in the first 3 months, this woman tried to get me fired. And I just couldn't understand that. Like, why isn't she helping me? And so again, I hope that we have changed and that we have evolved, and there's less of that thinking that, I clawed my way to the top, therefore you must claw your way to the top, and I'm going to be mean to you. But then I got married. I had my first, I got married, and then I got offered a job in Moscow in the Soviet Union, and I'd been married 3 years. And, my husband, when we were dating and got engaged, he said to me, Astrid, I can't be responsible for your happiness. Is that okay? And I was like, wait, you're the knight in shining armor who's supposed to make me happy. What's wrong with this? And then I realized that was actually the best thing my husband, my soon-to-be husband, ever said to me. It really stuck with me that he said, you are responsible for your own happiness. So when this job offer came from Harvard University for me to go to Moscow and run a project there in the last years of the Soviet Union, and my husband was about to start his career as a litigator in New York City, we had that conversation. I'm going to go to Moscow, and you're going to go to New York. And everybody thought our marriage was over. Nobody got that. But I said to Harvard University, this is another thing in leadership, you must negotiate, know what you want. I said to Harvard, I'll do this for you. You fly me every 6 weeks to New York City. And frankly, it was almost a necessity because in the old Soviet Union, you couldn't get good toilet paper. You pretty much have to bring your own suitcase of toilet paper. And I brought 10 computers, 2 printers. It was crazy. So I had this chance to have a breakthrough and a breakout, because I was in my 20s. I became an advisor to the first chief judge of the first constitutional court of the Soviet Union and then of Russia. So I had opportunities that no one would ever have had. And it was tragic in many ways to watch a giant society like that implode and see people's lives just fall apart. But I also got the biggest opportunity to make big decisions. I hired people off the street. I would find talent on the street. One of the talents I hired was a Korean Russian, Igor Khan, who had grown up on Sakhalin Island. That's an island between Russia and the Korean, Japan on the other side. And, he was a black marketer. He changed my dollars for me into rubles. But he was so talented, he could get anything for me. And so I said to him, do you want to work for Harvard University? And he's like, Harvard? He had never worked in a computer. I trained him, and Igor became the first Russian managing director of Morgan Stanley. So paying it back, finding talent, having no prejudice as to where you're going to find that talent. And that's paid off for me because he has a beautiful home in London and he lives in Moscow, but sometimes I can use the home in London. And of course, I got to work with Mikhail Gorbachev, a man that I think history will judge well. This is just a picture of how crazy those days were. This is the bombing of not bombing, but tanks attacking the White House of Russia when a lot of turmoil was happening internally in the government. So again, a breakthrough to be unafraid in leadership. Be unafraid. Fear is often the biggest factor, but be unafraid to take that biggest, baddest thing you are truly not qualified for. And being not qualified is not a hindrance, because if you're fast and if you can learn and you put in the work, you will succeed. And then, as my PhD friends all accused me of, I eventually converted to the dark side. I had a stint on Wall Street. I was actually in philanthropy for many years. I worked for Carnegie Corporation of New York, and we were focused on preventing deadly conflict. But in 1998, I realized that my field, the political science, conflict prevention, was kind of being superseded in a way by what was happening with the market. I was working in a communist country, and that was my field, but everything that was happening there was privatization, and the market, and new companies, and vouchers, and IPOs, and I didn't understand any of that. So I went to a couple of banks, and I told them, my best interview was with Morgan Stanley. You all know Morgan Stanley, one of the biggest investment banks in the world, and I said to the number 5 person there who was kind enough to give me an interview, I said, I want to be an investment banker, but please don't ask me any questions about investment banking. This gentleman's name is Vikram Pandit. He later became CEO of Citibank, and he was kind of shocked that I would say that to him. But then he said, okay. But I said, you can ask me anything. I'll answer anything. So we had a 2-hour conversation, and the outcome of that was a couple of weeks later, I had a job offer from Morgan Stanley. I didn't pick that. I picked a bank called Brunswick Warburg. I was a stockbroker. I took Series 7, Series 21 licenses, and I was a stockbroker, and then the Russian market imploded on me. You remember when the the ruble collapsed in 1998? And so I never thought with my Harvard and MIT degrees that I would ever get laid off. But I got laid off. Because that's what you do on Wall Street. You just kick people out when the market's not good. And I remember walking up and down, Park Avenue, thinking about that I was a failure. It was so hard. So that's another thing that will happen in leadership. There will be days you will feel utterly like a failure, and it's okay. You just go get a massage. And then in 2005, I returned to Asia. And how many of you have seen the movie Crazy Rich Asians? I hope you loved it. All the characters in that movie were my neighbors in Singapore for 10 years. I can name who they are. And this is crazy. My office was just over here. That's Hong Kong. I lived in Hong Kong. And one of the things that amazed me about returning to Asia was that I kind of returned with a New Yorker mindset because I was coming from New York City. And prior to living there, I had actually been flying there because I was involved in the peace process in the southern Philippines between the Moro Islamic Liberation Front and the government. This was after 9/11. And I was involved in these peace negotiations, and I had to really kind of overcome, jettison my New York mentality because everybody in the southern Philippines thought I was a CIA agent and people in the villages wouldn't talk to me. I looked very suspect. I'm Filipino, but I didn't sound totally Filipino. But so that was one thing where I had to, my identity kind of came full circle. And in Hong Kong and Singapore, there's probably 200,000 plus maids. Maids. It's like modern slavery. And they're almost all Filipino. There's some Indonesians and Burmese. And for the first time in my life, I thought, like, who am I? Because people were treating me like a maid. And if I didn't have makeup on, my Asian friends were telling me, buy the biggest, baddest Louis Vuitton purse, put it on, always have good makeup, never smile, be a snob. And I'm like, that's not me. But I went back there and I realized, I kind of rediscovered my identity actually as a Filipino. And I started giving all this training on self-esteem to all the women in Hong Kong. And then later in Singapore, I was chair of a nonprofit that actually trained these women in financial management and entrepreneurship because they worked for 10, 20 years really in slave-like conditions with no savings at the end of it. It was horrible. So we taught them to save. We taught them to put together business plans. The lecturers were executives like myself. So part of me that is like, who was I? And then how do I give back? That theme really ran strong. So, and then in Asia, I found that with all the money there, I was also very surprised that the sexism was so strong. And it's really weird because if you're a woman but you come from an important family, there's no sexism. You can be anything and do anything. But just a regular woman who has talent would have a harder time. And then I learned about feticide. Over 1 million girl fetuses and babies are still aborted or killed after birth. And that's just China and India. Other places, thankfully, I think Korea, Vietnam maybe a little bit have shifted that. But so I started looking at this dark side and really doing research. And I got Rockefeller Foundation to fund me to do this research because I was just really sick and tired of women who were either treated as sex workers or victims all the time or recipients of microfinance. So why can't they be gazillionaires? Why microfinance? So there was this stereotype and I didn't like that. So what was happening in Asia was for all the while, 54% of world GDP growth in the 10-year period from 2000 to 2010 was generated in the emerging markets of Asia. The wealth in Asia is staggering. Staggering how wealthy people have become. And yet there's all this dark side of, environmental degradation, inequality, and instability, which is also true of us here. But I made this argument that Asia needed all of its human capital. And when you looked at corporations where they couldn't fill their vacancies, Japan, as a very wealthy, healthy, educated country, could not fill vacancies because the Japanese women aren't working and they have a big problem with childcare. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said, he would open 200,000 spots for childcare, but you can't change it that quickly. It's very difficult. Culture is especially a very sticky factor. And so I was going all around Asia making these arguments. Religion was a factor there. As you know, it is in Utah. Religion and culture can be a factor. It breeds a certain kind of self-selection that I will not lead because I'm a woman and my role is over here. And that was an issue for me in my 20s and 30s, having my conversations with my ecclesiastical leaders, some of whom supported me, and others who kind of really condemned me and told me I wasn't a good mother and that I wasn't raising my children because I had a nanny. I mean, one of my ecclesiastical leaders literally said that to me in New York. And I was like, do you know how much I run from Wall Street to the pediatrician? And every time I travel on a trip, I would write the schedule and I would tape my voice so that, my nanny and my husband could play. He had no appreciation for what I actually had to do to be a good mother and also, succeed in my career. And so I think we all have to sort out those things and how we're gonna deal with them. But I wrote this report on women's leadership in Asia. It was translated into Vietnamese. I was very glad they used it all over Vietnam and in different places in Asia. And I think some of this is we have to improve the dialogue and the discourse. And if you see how diverse, this was a conference we had in Delhi, and Milan Verveer, who was, I think, Hillary Clinton's chief of staff, Vishaka Desai, the former president of Asia Society, and now an advisor to Columbia University's president. But all these women coming from different walks of life, different cultures. I involved Microsoft male executives in some of what I was doing because I worked for Microsoft, because we needed all the men in all these conversations. And frankly, some of them became the most effective, the most amazing, especially this gentleman here, Haresh Gupchandani. I'm almost done, I think. So UVU, we are in Utah. How exciting. 70% of students in Utah, 70% of college and university students are in institutions run by women. So let's give Utah a round of applause. That's very exciting. This was my first day on the job. I think a few days later I got inducted into Wolverine family. They gave me Wolverine feet. They made me dance to Dancing Queen, ABBA. And that's the UVU Student Association. And I've just been having such a great time since then. So I have 6 very quick lessons that I'll end with in my journey of leadership. The first thing is that, when we have daughters, and we ourselves, whatever stage in life we're in now, let's keep dreaming. What are our dreams so we are still alive? What do we want to do? What's really aching in us to come out? What is that fire that's yearning to burn? So keep dreaming, because dreams are free. And education, encourage all of us, our cousins, our nieces, our daughters, our sons, everybody to get an education, because I do feel in the journey of leadership, that is one thing that is absolutely necessary. It doesn't mean you have to have a big degree. Part of that also means just a mind that is eternally curious, and unafraid to ask questions. Try green eggs and ham. I talked about going to Moscow when I had been married 3 years, and people said to me, what are you doing? That's kind of weird. And I'm like, yeah, weird is good. Weird is good. So when you have something unusual in front of you and it smells very promising, just say yes. Say yes to it, and you'll go places. Don't take the journey alone. This is my husband of 30 years. He's kind of gray now, but he's still cute. And my mentor at BYU, Professor Gary Browning, my mentor at Carnegie Corporation, Ambassador Frank Wisner is the U.S. Ambassador to the Philippines and Zambia, Egypt, and India. These are relationships that are decades long. The oldest of these relationships is probably 35 years, or maybe 32 years. My thesis advisor at MIT, he's now in a home. He has dementia, and I just visited him last September. I love these people so much. Dr. Connie Soin, the first female hand surgeon of Singapore, refugee and immigrant from India and Indonesia, and ended up in Singapore. These are the people who, you must have people like this in your life. And the definition of this board, my personal board of directors, is these are people who must love you, number one, and tell you when you're being crappy. That they must be able to tell you that to your face because they love you. But you need a few of these people in your life. This is a picture of me when I was working with the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, and one of these Muslim leaders, Datu Paglas, he had started a plantation where he hired kidnappers, rapists, guerrillas, just to show that if you gave people something to live for, they're actually not going to get the gun and shoot people. But when he started the plantation, he met with the chief of the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, and the chief said to him, the first question he asked this chieftain was, is this plantation only for you, or is it good for the people? I think that's a critical question. How do we make work meaningful for mothers? We're leaving our children. It's a huge thing. We're leaving our children, and we don't have enough time to be at home and at work. How do we integrate that life and make it meaningful? How do we ensure that what we're doing is not just for us, but also for others? And then finally, this is my last slide, replenish your strength, or why the sacred matters. This is, I took this photography thing in Bangkok, and my teacher said, go out for an hour, take pictures. So I was just walking down the streets of Bangkok, and I saw this tire. It's a tire on a beat-up truck, and I just saw something in it, and I took this picture, and I realized life could sometimes be like this, like just a worn-out tire, beat-up tire. But where is the beauty? Where is the sacred? Where is the stillness? Where is the light? Where is the joy? I learned to wakeboard in my 40s, And I first looked out. There were like 17-year-old men who were young men who were doing that. And I thought, well, let me try it anyway. And I found a lot of joy in wakeboarding. In my family, I had a child in my old age, my third child. But, you know, my children bring me a lot of joy and a lot of grief. But they are my haven and my sacred place. And so let's remember this, because if we are to persist in the journey of leading, we must have this in our lives. So I think I took up too much time, but maybe we can have 5 minutes for questions if people are interested. Yes.
Interested in what brought you to Russian literature as your major?
Yes. So when I was a college student in the Philippines, I started college very early. I was 15 and really didn't know what I was going to do. And I had some false starts, first in chemical engineering and then in pre-med. And I didn't want to dissect a cat. So that was the early end of my pre-med career. And then I met this professor who had lived in Moscow for 11 years. And it was the time of the Cold War. And the Philippines was a very strong ally of the United States. But I couldn't find at my university, the University of the Philippines, I couldn't find anything about the Soviet Union. So I was just curious, if we are in a standoff with all these nuclear weapons, we're going to kill each other, shouldn't we know something about this enemy? So I got very curious, and I just kind of latched on to this professor, and he started teaching me Russian. And I took one class from him, and then when I arrived at BYU, there was a fantastic Russian department. And what I learned being interested in politics and international relations was that you couldn't actually divorce the history and politics, whether it's medieval Russia or imperial Russia or Soviet Russia. Everything that they did in politics was so linked to their arts. It really was. And they're deep into their arts. You know, their poets in the Soviet period could fill a stadium. They were rock stars. And so I then just latched onto Russian literature, and I had great professors. And I mean, to this day, you know, my brother's Karamazov might be even more marked up than my scriptures. There's more coloring in that book because it's just so profound. So I love reading. Mayor Kafuzi, you'll approve of me. I love reading. Yes.
What are the biggest challenges and your greatest enjoyment being president?
Okay, that's easy to answer. My greatest enjoyment is my students. I can just really say that with an open heart because I love the students. Our first-time, full-time, 4-year bachelor-seeking degree student is less than 20% of our student body. And so our student body is extremely non-traditional. And we have everything from, you know, automotive, culinary arts, to philosophy and ethics, master's degrees in family therapy, financial planning. So that diversity, every day I just encounter that. And my office, there's a walkway outside and there's a parking lot. There's a walkway. My office has all this glass. And every day these students walk by and they knock on the window and, you know, hard. It is the best thing in the world. It's like a drug. It's adrenaline. And then when I talk to them, and you know, many of them come from really difficult circumstances. 2 days ago, we had our Women's Success Center luncheon. At that lunch, we raised $320,000 from the women there for scholarships. And one of our students got up. Her name's Jamie Bond. And she said 2 years ago, she was escaping in the dark with 4 children, escaping from her husband with 4 children ages 3 months to 5 years. In the dark, fleeing. And because of the scholarship, and because we're open enrollment, anybody can come to UVU. All of you, please, enroll. She enrolled, got a scholarship, and she said, today I live my life in the light. She was contrasting that. She's a rising junior in finance. She showed a slide of her children. We're now 2 years older. But those are the things I encounter on almost a daily basis. So what's the hardest thing at UVU? I think the hardest thing is really moving academia into, you know, our 21st century world. There are so many wonderful reasons why the academy exists, and the academy shaped me into the person I've become. But today we face so many pressures, whether that's funding. Funding is a big pressure. nimbleness, agility, technological, digital transformation. So I know it's probably too many answers, but how do you move a big ship, make it stronger in the first place, and then move it faster to where, your students' success will be greater and faster. So, but the wonderful thing is our community, I really believe in our community, in our leaders, and I try to have very open, candid conversations. And Justin, my chief of staff, will probably attest to that. Maybe I'm too candid, but I find that if you just establish the trust and then kind of have very honest conversations, you can move. And so the potential is just huge, huge for what I call 21st century education. So maybe one more question? Yes, in the back.
So you've done a lot of different things with your life. Do you find that opportunities, are you looking for them, or do they just come to you? And how do you decide what you're going to pursue?
Yeah, so it's actually both. I've been offered jobs. I've been asked by people, and I've applied. I applied for the UVU job. And of course, I was in a field of 40 plus candidates, but I think I was a little bit of an outlier because I was applying from Singapore. So it's happened both ways. One really important point is your reputation. In the commercial world, they call it your brand. What is your brand? Are you a funny person? Are you a connector? Are you a communicator? So your brand precedes you. I think I got into Harvard because my own mentor at BYU had gone to Harvard, and he wrote me a letter of recommendation that said, of all the students I've worked with in X years of teaching, Astrid's the best. So that kind of reference and recommendation gets you places. And then how do I choose was your other question. So my career has been very jumpy and zigzaggy, and that's unusual for my generation. Are there people here, 20 to 35? Your career will be more like mine. Your journeys will be more like mine. You do one thing for a few years and then do other things. So how do I choose? I have several criteria in my mind that are quite important. The first is, do I like the people? When I interview, I always try to see if I'm going to like this person. Do I see myself hanging out with them? Because a lot of my waking hours will be spent with them. Number two, can I learn something from this job? I'm never looking to go to do something where I am an expert. In fact, I always look to go to places I don't know anything about. So that happened on Wall Street, that happened with technology at Microsoft. I'm not a techie. Can I learn something there? And then I also think about the third thing actually is, am I going to be compensated? Once I became a mother and had to pay for a nanny, I was in my early 30s. I did the numbers that if something ever happened to Jeffrey, my husband, I don't want to have a different standard of living. And so what do I need to do to support myself and my children? So those three things, and I've just really kept very open. And then when you interview for jobs, I would say know what you know and know what you don't know. When I've been interviewed by senior people, I'll say, here is what I don't know, and here's what I know. And I think people appreciate that because it makes them feel like you have nothing to hide. You really have nothing to hide, and you can indicate that, I have succeeded in other areas. So if you're willing to teach me why I already know X, and by the way, for women tend to have really non-traditional pathways to careers. In the startup space here in Utah, you will find women who didn't even get their degrees, but because they're so talented, I would recommend getting your degree. It makes it a little easier. But that zigzaggy pathway, and people see their potential. You give them this amount of work, and they're so good at it. You give them this much work, and they're so good at it, so you just keep giving them more and promoting them. And I hope that people do promote, the women, and if they don't, ask for your promotion. So I think I am out of time. Thank you so much for having me here today, and have a wonderful day with all the other lectures. And thank you. It's such an honor to be here.
say something really quick. So we have a table full of goodies back there. It's all for you. We like hit Sam's Club and we went all out. So snack away, help yourself, take 1, 2, or 3 at a time. And then outside, just right outside the door, is a table full of notepads and pens and free stuff. So if you need that to take notes on or whatnot, feel free to run and send someone from your table to grab you a notepad. But all of that is for you to take. So help yourselves. Okay, Amy.
Hi, you guys. I am so excited to introduce the next speaker. Andy Ellis is the author of 3 young adult titles, including This Is What I Did, Everything is Fine, and The End or Something Like That. Her middle grade debut, You May Already Be a Winner, was released in July 2017. Her books have received starred reviews and been featured on multiple lists. She is also the creator of the 8-Minute Memoir Project, which encourages connection and writing for everyone. She teaches as an adjunct creative writing instructor at Brigham Young University and has taught at various writing conferences across the country. She lives in the foothills of Provo, and she is a Provo native. When she's not writing, she's hanging around with her husband and 5 energetic children who are also Provo natives. My dear friend and fabulous woman, Andy Ellis.
Okay, this is exciting for me. How do I? Is it the? Okay, I don't know if you can see that picture very well, but this is me in 4th grade, and it was a time in my life when I was starting to do my own hair, have some opinions about things. But it was also a time when an internal voice started in my head that was pretty powerful. And that voice, that voice told me things like, you're not good enough, you don't fit in, you don't do the wall sit long enough, your diorama's dumb, whatever. And that voice just kept going throughout middle school, high school, all the way through college and becoming a mom. I'm going to cry. Because think about how tiring it is to have a voice in your head telling you you're not enough or telling you that everyone else is better than you. It's a really strong, powerful thing to have to fight all the time. And I have fought it, and it's been a journey for me. When Amy asked me to speak, I said, yes, I would love to speak. And then I saw the other speakers. And that voice just said, you know what? No, you should not. You're not good enough. Look at these women. Look what they've done. And who are you? There's so many women who could do this better than you. And I thought, this is the most exhausting thing. Why am I spending so much time thinking these things? And I thought, every single one of us in this room could and should be up here speaking. Every single one of us has stories and struggles and things we've done. Every one of us has been alone. Every one of us has overcome hurdles. And I feel like we all have stories we're telling. Every single one of us, no matter what we have or haven't done, we have value. And I hope that every day we have Women's Day in our homes and at parks, and that we're telling each other our stories and we open up to each other, because I think it's important. So today I'm going to talk about one of the things at a very early age helped me quiet that negative voice. I think all of us have things that help us do that, but you can see this is my About the Author, go back one, yeah. About the Author page on one of my first stories. And I discovered that writing for me, not only my own writing, but other people's writing, was a way that I could silence that negative voice. It's where I could really come back to myself. Flannery O'Connor says, I don't know what I think till I read what I say. And I think that's true. So writing has always been a refuge, a place where I could be weird, a place where I could explore, and then reading other people's writing has been also a refuge and a way to get to know other people's point of view, to see the world from other eyes, things like that. So today I'm specifically going to talk about my most recent novel, set here in Provo, You May Already Be a Winner, and my 8-minute memoir project. So now you can go to the next one. Okay, so this book grew out of an experience I had. I was in my Honda Odyssey, really dirty, smelly Honda Odyssey with 4 children, a baby, a toddler, and 2 little kids. And they were yelling, they were throwing goldfish crackers. What Does the Fox Say was playing. I mean, it was like just a regular day. And I came to a stoplight, and imagine I'm like spit up, probably breast milk. I mean, I was like in my sweatshirt, I hadn't, whatever. Next to me, this man pulls up in like a Corvette. I'm not sure if it was a Corvette, but it was a good car. And he was like, and I look over, and he looks at me, and he gives me this look, like, I can't even adequately do it. And I don't know what happened. It was like this fire, or I don't know, and both our windows were up, but I was, you don't know me. You don't know what I've done. You don't know what I'm going to do. You have no idea who I am. Don't judge me. And the kids in the car were like, kind of got quiet. The baby kept crying. And he drove away, and I drove away, and I just feel like if you have an experience like that, where you find yourself yelling at strangers who probably mean you no harm. I mean, he maybe wasn't even looking at me. He could have been looking at, we have the name Van etched in our van by our son Van. So he could have been looking at that. He could have been thinking about his own problems. He probably wasn't even looking at me, but I realized right then that the voices in my head were super loud. I was tired. I had these 4 teeny children. I was trying to write. I was a writer. I was a writer before I was married. I've always been a writer. But I wasn't really writing. I was mostly trying to make quesadillas. I was watching Nashville in the middle of the night. I wasn't doing the things. I felt like an iron had come and just ironed me out. I was like a flat pancake. And to make matters worse, my 3rd novel had come out, and my agent and editor had really had high hopes for it and said, it's just going to be your breakout novel. This is going to really set you on your path, because writing really is a struggle. And then my editor moved to Australia, and different things happened, and the book came out, and it was fine, but it wasn't a big deal. But I kind of had the pressure of that writing on my shoulders, and I hadn't been able to come up with anything. My mom had passed away. It was just like all these things had come up against me, and I realized a lot of times people say, especially to women, there's a time and a season. And I do believe that. Maybe right now isn't my time to write, is what I had decided in that moment. Maybe I shouldn't be a writer for a while. I will pick that back up in about 10 years. So it was around this time, when I had made that decision not to be a writer, that I yelled at this man in his Corvette. And right after that, one of my friends, who is a successful writer, also a mother, also a woman, she called me. She said, we're going to go to St. George for a writing retreat. You should come. For me, that was an impossibility. I was breastfeeding. I didn't have anyone to watch my kids. I had decided I was done writing for 10 years. And also, I felt like she and the other women who were going were real writers, and I was more of a fake writer, because they had deadlines, they were going on book tours, and I wasn't. And I told her, I can't, I'm not going to go. I can't do that. And she said, I think you are going to go, and we're going to come pick you up. And so I ended up going, and I remember the first day I was there, I was in a quiet room all by myself, and I didn't have anyone who needed me, and I felt this huge sense of relief, but I also felt I missed them. And I thought, oh my gosh, I don't even know if I can do this. Now I have this time to create, to do the thing I'd been wanting to do, and I miss my children, but I'm also feeling this pressure, what if now that I have the time to do it, I can't do it? What if I don't write something that people want? What if at the end I don't get a book contract? If I do something, if I take time away from my kids and family and don't have a monetary reward at the end, is it worth it? Or is that a waste of my family's time, my time, and everyone else's time? And I remember all this voice in my head was so loud. And then I thought, oh my gosh, just write. Just sit down and write. And so I started writing, and I wrote what I loved. I wrote about sisters taking care of each other. And I wrote about a mom who is struggling to raise her children with so many other pressures and things she's worried about and her own problems and not doing a very good job. I wrote about water aerobics at the Provo Rec Center, because it's you guys should all go there. I wrote about riding the bike, not my bike, my characters were riding bikes on the Provo River Trail to the Utah Lake. They were hoping to eat at Waffle Love. The girl goes to Dixon Junior High, where I went. And I just wrote about things that I loved. And before I knew it wasn't before I knew it, but after 3 days, I had 100 pages. I just knocked it out. And I wasn't thinking, this is going to be amazing. Like, I wasn't even thinking about that. I was just having joy and fun in the thing that I love. And I had really started to feel myself again. And I'd come back to myself. And I've been thinking about this a lot, because I don't think you have to leave your children for a long, extended period of time to come back to yourself. But I do think that every day we should be taking time to silence that voice and think, okay, what do I care about? What's happening with me? Am I doing what I love? And am I taking just a little bit of time to come back to myself? So for you, that might be painting, it might be hiking, it might be reading, it might be studying, it might be at your work, it might be organizing your closet if you're my sister. It could be a whole lot of things, but I think that we need to make time just every day to be quiet and to listen and to kind of come back to ourselves. That's something that I realized, because I think there's a time and a season, but for me, writing is part of me, and I don't want to give it up for 10 years. And so I needed to make it more of a part of my life so that I didn't yell at people that I didn't know. So that's how You May Already Be a Winner came to happen. The second project I wanted to talk about is called the 8-Minute Memoir Project, and it also grew out of a bad experience with my children, which not all of my writing and great things have come out of negative experiences with my children. It's just that I have 5 kids, and I just barely got out of the baby phase. And for me, it was a really big struggle for me to balance having my children and also keeping myself. In Terry Tempest Williams' When Women Were Birds, she writes about her love of the ocean, and especially the waves. And she says, I learned to trust that what I love can kill me, knock me down, and threaten to drown me with an unexpected wave. It was also here where I came to know I can survive what hurts. I believed in my capacity to stand back up and run into the waves again and again, no matter the risk. And this is a little bit how I feel about my children, because I love them more than anything. But they are waves, and they come at me. And the same thing with writing. I love writing, but it can come at me with waves. And I think anything you love, it can be wonderful, but can also be really hard. And so in this particular experience, we were at Target back to school shopping, and I had all 5 kids with me, a baby, a toddler, and I don't know why, but I decided they should each get their own shopping basket. Like we were on a TV show, and they should, I don't know, like they each had their own basket, and they just were just piling stuff in, and I realized I'd made a mistake. My baby had to go to the bathroom, so we had to all go to the bathroom, and then we came back out, and then she had a blowout. Anyway, we ended up not buying anything at Target. But I came back, and I was sitting on my porch, and this is the view of my yard at the time, and I thought, okay, I'm again at that dark place. I'm again at this place where I feel overwhelmed, and I feel like getting on a bus or eating donuts. I don't know, there's a lot of things I wanted to do rather than like be where I was, to feel what I was feeling and to be where I was. And I thought to myself, you need to write. And I also thought to myself, you need other people. You need other women. Because you're doing this alone right now. It's been a long stretch of not writing and not connecting with other women. So I had been contemplating starting this project on social media for a while. And again, I'd had second thoughts. I thought, I don't know if anyone would want to do it. I don't know if I'll be consistent with it. And so I worried about that. I also worried that people would think I was trying to be cool or something and say that I knew stuff. But the thing is about writing is I do know some stuff about writing. And I wonder why sometimes we're hesitant to say, this is something I love and I know, and I want to share it with you. So I posted this. It says, let's see, why won't my kids jump on my trampoline? I thought that was funny. I'm starting a memoir group. I'll post prompts 3 times a week, and you have to write 8 minutes a day. Once a quarter, we'll have readings at houses and writings, and it will keep us happier and sadder and funnier and not so mad when one of our kids poop at Target. Who is in? I waited, and I thought about pressing the delete button. I just got anxious, but then some people replied, and they said, yeah, I want to do this. This would be something that I'd be interested in. So the next post that I put up was, day 1, I remember when, and I asked them to set their timer for 8 minutes, go somewhere quiet, get out your writing utensils and write, I remember when at the top of your page and start writing. The rules are you don't edit, censor yourself, don't worry whether what you're writing is good or bad, don't worry who might read it, just write whatever comes into your head. Try not to think too much. If you get stuck, write, I remember when again, and try something new. Go the full 8 minutes without stopping. If you want to keep going, great. If not, great. If you feel like it, comment about how it went. So it was really important to me that people felt like there were no boundaries on this writing. It didn't have to be good. It didn't have to be bad. It could just be anything you felt, just let it go. Kind of the same thing where no judgment, like let all those bad voices out of your head and just write and see what happens. And then the next day I posted this one. I don't remember. Today is opposite day, same rules as before, right? I don't remember at the top of your page. And I go on to talk about how the things keep slipping my memory, big things, little things, the sound of my mom's voice, the agony of mastitis, the address of my first apartment in Hong Kong. And then I invited people to try that. The next one was write about a billboard. The next one was write about spring. The next one was pick a street that you love. And I just wanted people to write whatever happened when these things came to your mind. And if I'm wondering if any of you had things pop in your head just with any of those topics. I think some of them you are nodding your head. And so I invited people to do that. And I wrote the things too, but what was more exhilarating for me was to think that not only was I writing it, but maybe other people were writing it. It was almost like we were writing together in our own homes by ourselves. But I just thought it's kind of a cool thing that maybe we are doing this. And then the next one, I invited anyone who wanted to come over to my house for memoir night, to read one of their 8-minute memoirs, and to listen to each other's 8-minute memoirs. And actually, I said they didn't actually have to read it, but I would like them to come if they dared. And so people came, and there were people I knew, and there were people I didn't know. There were people that were in my family and people that I'd never seen before. And so we sat around, and we each took a turn reading one of our 8-minute memoirs. And I have a couple I want to share with you. This first one is from my neighbor Jane, who I didn't know very well at the time. And she's older than me. She's an older woman. And she was talking about she wrote about the death of her brother. So she says, a few weeks ago, I received a card in the mail from David Austin Roses telling me a rose bush had been purchased for me by Don Franson and that it would be arriving at the end of the month. I walked around the yard contemplating where it should live. It was described as a large bush with spreading growth, adorned in summer with very fragrant orange-tinged blooms. The yard that used to be so vast is now stuffed with plantings. I settled on 2 places that could work with some trimming and transplanting, but there was plenty of time to get a spot garden ready. And then a week later, my brother Steve was gone. No, it wasn't the end of the month, but when I arrived home on that terrible day of knowing, the rose had arrived in a large cardboard box addressed to Lady Jane Wise. The last thing I wanted to do was deal with a rose that needed air and water immediately. I went to bed thinking the rose was on its own. Good luck without me. I myself was in need of air and water. All things die sooner or later. When I decided to end the troubled night by getting out of bed, my first thought was for the rose. I didn't go to the gym that morning. Instead, I pried open the box while it was still dark, read all the instructions, gave the rose a drink, and headed out in the yard. The dawn, only a faint streak in the sky. Amazingly, as I filled the watering can, I was arrested by thoughts of a new planting place next to the steps on the south side of the house where the 4 o'clocks reseed themselves every year. I had pulled them out a few days before. The ground was even in full sun and was begging for a fragrant, spreading bush. I dug the hole with fork and shovel, lifted out several buckets of compost from the compost pile at the bottom of the yard, and scraped and troweled and set in and stamped down and watered for an absorbing and healing hour. The sun was up and morning had broken when I finished. My friend Emily wrote, my face. I, like anyone, like to look nice, but also recognize that I'm not an exceptionally beautiful person, and I'm okay with that. I used to wear a little bit of makeup when I was a teenager and in my 20s, usually just mascara and some eyeliner or lip gloss. I never wore foundation because I didn't like anything covering my freckles. I loved during the summer when my freckles became so pronounced and I ended up with a large brown splotch on each cheek. I no longer wear makeup. In my 20s, I would wear makeup on Sunday, but then I started going to the temple early Monday mornings, and I didn't shower between Sunday and Monday, and I didn't have a face washing routine, and I hated how my mascara was smeared on my face. So I just stopped wearing it. Then, once I stopped, something kind of snapped in me, and I really disliked how for men to dress up, all they have to do is clean themselves and wear a nice fitting suit. For women, we need to be clean, do our hair, do makeup, and we begin to not really look like ourselves. I like looking like myself. I like being me. I like seeing children and their beautiful faces, and they are so authentic. Sometimes I feel like makeup is just that, makeup. We try to be something we aren't when we put that makeup on. We don't want people to see us. I want people to see me. I want to be me. I like seeing the wrinkles that I'm developing. I don't mind getting older as long as my body functions, but I don't mind looking older. I don't have a model face. It isn't anything exceptionally beautiful or special, but it is my face, and I like it. This last one is from my friend Millie, and she said, I remember the smell of my father's leather bomber jacket and the creaky, squeaky sounds it would make. I remember driving from Payson to Provo in the front of the truck, tucked behind his arm as he drove. The sky was gray, and I have a small image of looking over at the full rectangular silo that comes just before the sugar plant. I also remember my brothers and I sitting on our tattered brown sofa around and on my mom in our small golden family room in Payson, and my dad sitting across from us alone in the overstuffed chair when they told us they were getting a divorce. I don't remember what they said or who told us. I'd guess it was my dad. Maybe Will would remember. He's got a good memory for details. I just remember looking over at my dad so alone over in the chair across from us. I felt overwhelmed by the sadness and couldn't stand the thought of him having to sit by himself when we were all so sad. It felt urgent, so I went over to be with him, and I crawled into his lap. What a crappy thing for parents to have to gather the family together to tell them you're getting a divorce. Now, Millie's been my friend for years, and I knew her parents were divorced, but I had never seen that scene. I had never been in that living room, and when she read that, I felt so much love for her, and I felt so close to her in a completely different way. And those nights, and there haven't been a lot because there just haven't, but everyone is different, and they're all surprising and wonderful, and I keep thinking, we need each other, and we need to hear each other. We need true voices. We need each other's open, vulnerable, real stories, and we need safe places to read about our parents' divorce, about our faces, about losing a brother, about being the best at de-seeding a pomegranate, about being alone, about accidentally helping people cheat on math tests in high school, about sisters who fly away like birds, about husbands who give the wrong gifts, about stepping on frogs and moving away and eating pie backwards, and about mothers and bodies and jobs and toes and kissing and leaving, and about feeling alone at Target with our kids, mostly about being a woman. So I'm grateful for writing, and I'm grateful for all of you, and I'm grateful that we don't have to do this alone with all those false voices saying we're not enough, because we are. And I'm grateful for the quiet that can come when we just stop, and I'm grateful for connection. I guess I don't know, if anyone have a question, yeah. Okay.
I just want to thank you publicly for amplifying my voice again after my mother died. I would also encourage every woman in this room, because I know you all have stories. I would encourage you to find this venue or another venue to write your stories and to tell your stories, because that's what connects us. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, that's good. Okay.
You guys, do you need to stand for a second while I introduce Sergeant King? Go ahead and stand up and stretch yourselves a bit. And you guys, while you're still standing, I want to encourage you to follow Andy on Instagram. It's Andy Candy. You could see it up there. I have never written one of those memoirs, but I have faithfully read every single one and thought about what I would say, and it makes me feel good. Okay, here we go. Sergeant Nisha King of the Provo Police Department possesses a Bachelor's of Science in Sociology with a certificate in criminology. She is currently enrolled in Columbia Southern University, working on a master's in public administration. Sergeant King began working in juvenile corrections in the summer of 1996 in Utah. She is the mother of twin boys who were born in the fall of 2002. She started in policing in 2004 in the Killeen Police Department in Texas. While she was there, she was a member of the Riot Disturbance Team, FTO, and a domestic violence detective. Sergeant King returned home to Provo and started with the Provo Police Department in March of 2012. While employed with Provo, she has been on the Metro SWAT team since July 2014. A school resource officer at Dixon Middle School, a patrol sergeant, a RAD instructor, and taught numerous self-defense classes. She has been on the PIO team since 2015 and is currently full-time PIO recruitment, equipment, and distribution. And she's very familiar with this podium.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity. Sorry, I can't speak all super close. I've learned in press conferences I'm really loud. So it just doesn't work. First of all, I want to thank you, Mayor. Thank you for allowing me to come and speak with all of you and the opportunity. So I want to start, this is just so you know, this is not something I'm super familiar with, actually speaking about personal things and about my family. So I am a little bit nervous because I'm going to share with you personal information that I never do. So I will start and I will preface this. I know we've already talked this morning about our own background. So a little bit about me. I actually was born and raised here in Provo. So ultimately, this is where I wanted to end up working because I love this city. I definitely see a different side of this city now than I did when I was young. So family history background. My mother is Middle Eastern, so she's half Israeli, half Lebanese. So my grandmother was a Jew and my grandpa was a Muslim. So I knew from when I was little, we have a lot of internal conflict, which means you will be strong and you will press forward, and it doesn't matter what you encounter, you have to press forward. So she technically calls herself a Jewish mom. I will say from a very young age, my mother instilled confidence and strength in everything I did. My grandmother and her sisters had tattoos on their arms from concentration camps. So my mama always reminded me, well, you don't have a tattoo on your arm, so you can do anything you want and no one will ever stand in your way. So I'm fortunate, I know, to have that background and to have that history and to have that level of confidence to know even when I felt down, my mother would say, no tattoos, huh? So, in this culture, in LDS culture, it was kind of like, people are like, she's like little, why are we talking about tattoos? It's kind of weird. On the other side, my father was a school teacher in juvenile corrections, which is kind of actually what led me to work in juvenile corrections. I was very lucky that I began working in juvenile corrections when I was 18 years old. Well, I was 19 years old, but some of the kids in the correctional facility were 18. Normally they make you wait until you're 21, but because my father was a school teacher, I had a very unique opportunity. So I will back up a little bit. When did I decide to be a police officer? I don't know how many, by raise of hand, sorry, I like to involve people in things. It's just what I do. How many people are actually from Provo or who grew up in Provo, by raise of hands? Oh, quite a few. Okay. So do you remember in 1988 there was a huge flood? That basically there was a ton of snow and then it heated up really quickly and like the streets were flooded. Well, I grew up actually, I lived a little south of the state hospital. So the runoff was crazy. So everybody in the neighborhood put sandbags up and they basically created a river down 3rd South. Well, being a persnickety 11-year-old, I was like, oh, I got this. It's a little too much confidence. So I was leaning over the sandbags and my arms were, letting my arms run through the water and it pulled me in. So thank goodness about 20 yards down the road was a drain, and I got stuck in the drain, but the water was rushing, and all I remember is this big burly man who reached down and said, "Do you need a hand, little lady?" And I looked up and I'm like, "Yes!" And I don't know who it was, but it was a Provo police officer. And I was like, "Yes, I do." I don't know that it was as dramatic as I'm telling you, but I recall it to be that dramatic. And like I said, I don't know who that officer was, but I thought after that moment, and he helped me out, and he was like, do you know your way home, or do you want me to take you home? And I was like, I got it. I'm okay, because I didn't want to do the walk of shame to my mother of, what were you doing? But from that moment on, I decided I wanted to be a hero. I wanted to be there for people when they were in their lowest moments or they thought they were going to die, just like I felt like I was going to die in that water. So again, between that and with my father in corrections, I decided, okay, a good start would be juvenile corrections. So I started working in juvenile corrections, and I loved it. I actually worked in juvenile corrections. So like she explained, I have twins. I worked up until 10 days before I had my twins in a correctional facility. So imagine I was like 54 inches around, because they were all out in front of me because they're both boys. So I had my twins. I actually took a little leave of absence and decided, no, my mom's stubborn. She thinks I just need to do this and, be a working mom. But I took 2 years off. So I stayed home with my twins to raise my babies until I got a little stir crazy in the house, and I started to write, which is not something that I normally do. And I started to read, which is also, I like to informational read, but I'm not a super fantasy reader. But I started to read, I'm like, okay, let me refocus here. So for me, my mother was like, why are you not in the workforce? So I'm like, okay, here we go. It's time to fulfill my dreams. So at the time, my ex-husband was in the military, so I was in Killeen, Texas, so I joined the Killeen Police Department. In Texas, it was a little bit different. It was like 60-40, 60% men, 40% women, so I fit right in. It was a super easy slide into it, and that's because it's predominantly a military town. So there's a lot of women who have gone through the military, and then Killeen was, like I said, everyone's kind of either retired or out of the military, so I kind of fit in at that point. I loved it. I had a blast. I was shot at. I chased people. I worked lots of crazy homicides. I helped a ton of people in floods, ironically. In Texas, it floods like crazy. I will tell you, being a police officer, it was a really hard transition. I say my ex-husband. It was hard for him to understand that I carried a gun all the time. It was very intimidating to him. We worked crazy hours. It was really difficult to communicate with him and help him understand that I get it. I'm in a line of work that is predominantly men. But I come home, and my priority is my family. It was about 2 years into being a police officer, I learned that this is a uniform, and this represents something, but this does not represent who I am. I go to work every day, and I help people, and I do all of these things, but I come home, and I needed to figure out a balance, and to figure out, how can I come home and be a wife, and a mom, and a daughter, and a friend? Because that was difficult to go in this from one role to another. So I decided, my boys were little, they were about 4. Number one, I decided I need to start taking care of myself. So these are actually pictures of my current husband, because he totally rocks. The ex-husband's like, meh, he gave me my kids. But anyways. But the catch was this. I had to learn balance in my life, and I had to learn that what do I do? What do I need as a woman to transition? So I learned, and my kids were 4, and I learned, and that's kind of towards the end of my relationship with my first husband, but I learned that I needed to go home and take my uniform off and hang it up in the closet. And that police officer, so my kids, even to now, my twins are 16, and they even know now, if mom walks in the door in this uniform, don't talk to her, because you will get police officer. You will not get mom, and not the nice mom. So they've learned, even at 4 years old, I explained to them, mom needs to go take police officer off and go hang it in the closet, because I needed to be able to transition and to change. So that's kind of been a process. I will get to this here in a second. My current husband's totally awesome. I came to Provo. I decided, once I divorced my ex-husband and whatnot, and he was transferred somewhere else, I decided it was time to come home. Again, family values. My parents are here in Utah. My parents are elderly, and it was time for me to come home and take care of them and to help them. That hang police officer up in the closet and become a daughter role was really important to me. So I came back to Utah. Again, I love Utah. We have so many beautiful places to see and so many opportunities of things to do. The mountains, with hiking and outdoors, and again, was part of my progression to learn to have balance in life, that I should play as hard as I work. So if I work really hard, I need to play just as hard. At the gym, a lot of folks will bring their kids to the gym. Generator CrossFit's probably been one of the best things for me because, as you can see, Everest likes to sit on my husband while he does push-ups, and we go to the shooting range. So finding that balance of, it's not just a matter of hanging up work in the closet when I get home. It's also a matter of taking care of myself and realizing it's not a bad thing. Kind of like what you already talked about with, you really have to find you as well. That there is a side of me that is a police officer, but I come to work to take care of my family. My family's what matters. So kind of continuing, the transition to Provo was really hard for me, honestly. We have 4 female officers in Provo Police Department, so I can't even give you a percentage. There I could say 60-40. Here, I think we're at 107 officers right now, and yes, 4 of us are females. So it was a huge difference. I'm like, where's the ladies? Where's all the female officers? Again, that kind of goes back to my childhood. Through the different chiefs that I've worked for here in Provo, I've had, I will say, hundreds of females come do ride-alongs with me. We have a very different, unique community. I had one young lady ride along with me, and I don't know if y'all know where the old jail is, kind of by Slate Canyon. I went and stopped out on a group of juveniles that were trespassing. I don't know, it was probably 15 juveniles. I stopped out with these juveniles, and I was talking to them about good choices and bad choices and having fun that's legal. So I have this conversation. I send all these kids on their way, send them home, and I get back in the car, and this young lady was like, "Can you take me to the station?" And I'm like, "Sure. Yeah, are you okay?" And she's like, "I was so scared for your safety. You were out talking to all these kids all by yourself." And again, that was another self-actualization of everyone is so different, and we are all so unique, and our levels of tolerance are all different, but we can use all of these to a positive. So from the old jail to the station here, we had a really good conversation about self-confidence and strength and knowing your limitations and knowing what you can and you can't do, and also maybe pushing yourself a little bit further than you would necessarily normally go. So it kind of leads me to having some mental and physical strength. Throughout my career, I know that someone had asked the question earlier about, did you do this yourself? Did you have opportunities? I will say I was definitely fortunate to have my father working in corrections to get me started, but I will tell you, this is, again, and I know I'm very lucky that I decided, you know what, I want to be a police officer. This is just what I want to do. But I will say as a female, to be honest, it has been hard. And people didn't give things to me, and I have worked my buns off. While I was in Texas, it wasn't even an option for me to be on the SWAT team. Females were just like, you're not strong enough, you're never going to do it, you can't do it. So I kind of had that as a dream, but didn't know how to actually make it happen. Well, when I came back to Utah, like I said, this is my home. I was ready to do it. Even though I was in my 30s, I was ready to do it. So I trained with the SWAT team for 2 years, as they called me a hopeful or a wannabe. And I said, okay, I don't care. And they were very resistant. They didn't want me on the team. Don't tell the chief all this. Well, they were resistant. They were not very nice to me. They didn't want me there. They were scared they couldn't be themselves because a female was there. They were afraid that I wasn't going to be able to, if one of them got injured, I wouldn't be able to save them or to drag them out, or I didn't have the physical strength, or I would have had the mental fortitude to handle a situation if we were shot at. And in that 2 years, I showed them that at the end of the day, they will hide behind me, and I will lead the group, and I will go, and I will save people. And then when they're shot, I'll go and take care of them also, because it's what we do as women, right? It's just what we do. I was the first female on Metro SWAT. I'm the first female SWAT operator in Utah County. Yes, I'm very proud of that. The week before our SWAT tryouts, again, I say accomplish what they say you can't. They told me I couldn't do it. I worked out 3 times a day for the 3 months before SWAT tryouts. And ironically, the week before, I went to the gym. And at the end of my workout, I kind of wasn't feeling great. Our chief secretary, Kristen Kraft, and her husband, Jeremy Kraft, Jeremy's the fire chief of Lehigh. Thank goodness they were at the gym with me, because Kristen said, "You don't look right, Nish." And I said, I don't feel right. Well, that's the last thing that I remember until I was in the ambulance. And I remember the ambulance guy saying, "Kids, your phone's ringing. Some kid says, is he supposed to open the door?" I remember the ambulance guy telling me. And I'm like, "Tell him it's Kristen, it's okay." I recall that, and then I remember being in the hospital room, and I actually remember Chief King and my mother there saying, "Eat these cookies." And I'm like, "That's unhealthy. I can't do it. It has sugar. I've been so good. I can't eat it." Again, know your limitations. Finally, the chief told me, he said, "You eat these cookies or you're fired." And I'm like, "Fine, I'll eat sugar." And I remember eating it. Well, my blood sugar was 12. So they said, a normal person probably would have died. So I will say I had to learn a limitation, that sometimes you do things you don't want to do. But it's for your better. It will help you. I did. The tryouts were the next week. The doctor told me, "If you try out, you could die. You now have hypoglycemia, and you're pre-diabetic because you pushed yourself too hard." And I said, "Is that advice or is that a requirement?" And he was like, "No, really, you could die." I'm like, "So you're saying it's advice?" I had worked too hard. I tried out. We have a SWAT doctor. I told Doc Smith, I said, "Just so you know, if I fall out, this is probably what it is. Just don't let me die. Because I have babies to go home to. And being a mom is number one, but this is really important to me." So I made it through. And again, I got on the SWAT team. So since then, things have progressed, and I think that the guys on my team didn't realize that, yes, I do add a different element to the SWAT team. I contribute differently than the guys can, and I thank goodness they appreciate that. At this point, I'm the logistics sergeant on the team. So, okay, maybe a lady role. I take care of all the paperwork. I make sure everybody's organized. Everyone's up to date on their training. We had SWAT training last night until 10:30. It snowed. I had hand warmers. I had granola because they were like, "It's late, I'm hungry." Good thing I've got a giant Costco-sized bag of granola in the car. So, but then on the flip side, I'm right there with them, kicking in the door if needs be. So like I said, realize, a big thing, people kept telling me, "You can't do it. It's not something you can accomplish." That was my driving force, to prove them wrong, to show them that I can do it. Some people, it might take you longer. It might be more difficult. Like I said, they told me I'd never be able to bench my body weight on a physical fitness side. I said, "Oh yeah?" I started at 95 pounds, and then within 6 months, I benched 185 pounds. But I told them, "I will do this just because you said I can't. I will accomplish this." And then I will say, if anything, there's a lot of values. We have a lot, we talk in law enforcement a lot about values and ethics and ethical policing. And for me, having courage is probably the number one thing that has gotten me through any trial or any tribulation or anything that I've gone through, is be courageous. And then, of course, believe in yourself. If you don't believe in yourself and you don't love yourself, no one else can. So that's truly what matters. And then, of course, I'm a police officer, so I love the opportunity that I have all you ladies in this room. So really quickly, let's look at this together. Tips to stay safe. What do we do as women? We get, like she said, we're in the car, we're driving with our kids, everybody's throwing stuff at you, and things are crazy, right? Be aware of your surroundings. How many times do you start out at home and you've run like 5 errands and you're like, "How did I get here?" Am I wrong? Do we not do this? For personal safety, be aware of your surroundings. Don't zone out. Don't get to that point of, even if that means exhaustion, because how many times do you go without enough sleep, without taking care of yourself, without eating, without, like I said, the hypoglycemia, God said, you will eat. It's what you do. You can't not do something for yourself. Take care of yourself. Do things to take care of you, because we need to get a bunch of people around safely, right? Step 2, some simple things. Use your keys as a weapon. A lot of this is kind of something funny. So I also teach, like we said, some women's self-defense classes. Has anyone in here heard of RAD? Some women, rape aggression defense. It's a women's self-defense class. Utah County Sheriff's Department, they teach it. We're going to start up teaching it again as well, so watch our social media. But it teaches you, it was fascinating to me to see these ladies in our community. How easy is it for you to yell at somebody, no, and stay back? I was shocked. Like 90% of the class was like, no. But we can all yell at our kids, right? But you can't yell at a stranger. So use your voice. If somebody makes you uncomfortable, there is nothing illegal about yelling, stay back. That makes me uncomfortable. Protect yourself. Have a voice. It's okay to have a voice. And then, to kind of talk about the end part, really quickly, does anybody follow our social media? So I'm busting you out if you have or you haven't. You follow our social media? So that's one of my roles as well. I run all the social media. Something that we've recently started is a 9 p.m. routine. So on a personal safety side of things. We started the 9 p.m. routine because just to bring awareness to our community. Do you leave your porch lights on? Everybody's like, oh my gosh, my electric bill's so high, I can't do this. But it's for your safety. If you know you're going to leave the house and you're not going to come home until after dark, leave your porch light on. Because then you come home to a well-lit house. And then here's the other thing. As you're pulling up to your well-lit porch and garage, look around. Are there people hiding in your bushes? Are there people skulking around I like that word. Some lady uses that all the time on our social. There were bad guys skulking around. I'm like, yes. Yes, thank you for the contribution, skulking. That's a good word. Anything I say like that, they'd be like, oh, you're labeling people. But look, be aware of your surroundings. When you get out of your car, I'll give you an example. So you've got your keys. Stick your keys through your fingers, because this just became a weapon. So if somebody came to attack you, can you hit them in the face? Yes. Can you stab them in the eyeballs? Yes. You can. If you feel like your life is in danger, do it. And then call us. It's better, I always say if somebody broke into my house, the police better come really fast, because the blood on the grout's going to stain it. And I don't want to stain, because that's something I'm going to have to clean up. Because ultimately it will, right? Ultimately, in the end, ladies, be assertive, be strong, and be confident in who you are and the strengths you have. We're all different. I understand that policing is probably not for everybody. And that's okay, because I love it. Because it's a fun opportunity. But there is something right. Do what you love and be passionate about it. It is my true belief that you can do anything you set your mind to. So, any questions? Any questions? Anything? Yes, ma'am. So funny side note, now I'm going to bust you out, Karen. So even Karen, she texted me earlier. She was like, I thought I might get to see you without a vest on. Here's the funny thing. You would be amazed how many people call me sir on a daily basis. So my nails are something that I pride myself on. And if you make me break my nails, sorry, you'll get the use of force report, Mayor, because I don't want to break my nails. I'll tell you a funny story really fast. I was like, that's the other funny thing about me in policing. I seem to be at the wrong place at the right time all the time. So I'm just doing my regular patrols, and they tone out this robbery that just occurred. There were 4 guys, 2 guys had guns, and I was 2 blocks away. So I'm like, oh, great. So I pulled, just in a safe distance and see that some of the suspects run into a different apartment. It was at an apartment complex. So I basically go up, make sure I've got another unit, some backup there, because I knew where the gunman went. And I kind of stood back a little bit. They opened the door. the guy came running out with this rifle in his hands, and I grabbed him with his shirt and wrapped my hands in it and threw him to the ground. Well, of course, he drops his rifle. And what's funny is, all the guys were watching me. No one helped me because I started screaming, "You made me break my nails!" I was so mad. And all the guys are laughing, and they're all like, "Does our body camera get that?" I'm like, "Really?" I'm like, "My nails are bleeding. Someone come put him in handcuffs. Darn you people." So I pride myself in having nice nails, just to be ladylike. So, any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Here in Provo. So I'm going to tell you, here in Provo, I'm a little bit biased because I came to Provo with 8 years of experience. So I have, I will say I pride myself on separating myself from other people's trauma. That it's their trauma. I'm there to help. I'm there to keep people calm and to be patient with people, but it's not my own to take home. So I will say here, once I came to Provo, I was a little more seasoned officer. So I will say difficult-wise, not so bad. I don't know, you take things in stride. I will say my most difficult call I've ever had in my career was one of my coworkers committed suicide. And I had to go and work the suicide, read the suicide note, notify the chief and the mayor, and that was but again, that was personal. So it's different. Because it was a friend of mine. So, otherwise difficult police call. I don't know if y'all remember that we did the press conference on the gentleman who killed his father and put the body in a deep freezer. That was a very complicated case, but so good question. Yes, ma'am. Education, just educate. That's why I say, please follow us on our social media, because I put out everything, crime trends, accident trends, just being able, really honestly, we are really in a unique time in society alone. Just to have social media and the ability to communicate with our community is awesome. I love and thank goodness we have Channel 17 who helps us make public service announcements, but probably one of the most difficult things is just educating our public to remind them, lock your cars. Oh, another new big one. Don't leave your keys in your car overnight. I know you're like, oh, that's common sense. You'd be shocked. A ton of our vehicle thefts are because people leave their keys either under the floor mat, in the center console. Oh yeah, it's great. Or here's another thing. Tell me, don't raise your hands. How many of you have been guilty of starting your car to warm it up and going back in the house and leaving your car running unattended? There's another one that. So I think probably one of the biggest challenges is mostly just educating our community, because with having BYU and all the different students, we have a very, I'll say, in the center of our city, we have a transient community. So they come for a certain amount of time, and then we've got to reach out to them to educate them again that, yes, Provo is a safe city. I think our number one crime, and correct me if I'm wrong, are bicycle thefts. Could be worse, right? Could be worse. But is it still an issue? Absolutely. So I think just being able to communicate, I know that Karen Tapahes works with our neighborhoods, being involved in your neighborhood, even if it's something simple of adding your neighborhood Facebook page. Just being aware of what's going on, that would make such a difference, even in the level of crime that we have. So hopefully that answered your question. Yes, ma'am. That's a really good question. And I'm going to throw this out there just to be wicked mayor. Sorry to put you on the spot. Good leadership is really what matters. When I first came to Provo, I get that, I learned really quickly that Killeen, Texas was substantially different than Provo, Utah. And I first came here. Sorry, I'm also on call for SWAT, so I'm sure you guys heard about our shooter in Orem we're still looking for. Yeah, sorry, the phone's always going off. That's another part that my family loves. When I first came here, one of my very first complaints was to a lieutenant that I went to a domestic. The gentleman called and complained that I demanded him to sit down on his couch, and excuse my language, and shut up, and don't talk until I told him to, and that it wasn't his turn. He didn't have the talking stick. He was, and I didn't, and basically I controlled the scene, but he said I came into his house and I disrespected him, I spoke down to him, and it was inappropriate for a woman to come into his home and to speak to him that way. This uniform is the same uniform that the guys wear. Thank goodness I had good leadership, and my lieutenant said, here's my question for you, sir, before you explain anything further. Did she do any, if it had been a male officer, would you be still making this complaint? And he said, well, no, it's different. It's a female. And so thank goodness I had a great supervisor who said, well, I appreciate you calling and expressing your concern, and I'm sorry you were frustrated, but she's an officer just as any of the guys. So really, honestly, I will completely attribute it to our good leadership. I mean, and not to toot your horn, but I feel so fortunate to have a female mayor now. I really think that she has brought such a different attitude and element to our city. I'm amazed to see how, even when I started as the public information officer, and then how things have progressed now, our city government is a team, and we're a family. And I will completely attribute that to Mayor Kaufusi, because she's brought us all together and made us a team and helped us work together. And she's like our big mom. She just is. She's like the mom of all of us, and she takes care of us. And you know, we knew even like with Officer Shinner's shooting, we knew that we had support all the way to our mayor. And that made such a difference to all of us, and for the officers to see how much she cared about us and our department as part of her family. So, sorry. Anyways, hopefully that answered your question. I think when it comes to sexism and stuff in the community, it's just going to happen. I choose to not be offended. Any other questions? Sorry, I've gone over time almost as well, so. I do. They're 16. And they are a challenge. Glad to hear that. What's that? No, that was it. God knew that 2 for the price of 1, that pregnancy thing, whew, that was not for me. I like slept many nights on the edge of the tub over the toilet thinking, I'm going to die now. And then I threw up all night long. It was great for like 5 months. So I have a number of stepchildren as well, so that makes it a little bit easier. So, and I will say on that side, like I said, I'm fortunate to have the husband I do now. While actually on SWAT, they held a county SWAT team held a Hell Week for our team, and I happened to be single at the time. I'd been a single mom for 9 years, and my husband's on the county team, and he's like, so, do you want to go shooting sometime? I'm like, I don't want to date anybody, just so you know. I'm good at being a single mom. So it does also, don't get me wrong, it really helps to have a supportive spouse also, and on, being a woman in law enforcement. So, any other questions? I think we're out of time. Thank you all for letting me come here.
So I'm pleased to introduce our final speaker today. Carolina Nunez is the Associate Dean of Research and Academic Affairs and a professor of law at Brigham Young University's J. Reuben Clark Law School. She researches and writes about immigration law, citizenship, and immigration rights with a specific emphasis on undocumented immigrants. Professor Nunez's articles have been published in the Southern California Law Review, Wisconsin Law Review, and Utah Law Review. Dean Nunez also co-founded the J. Reuben Clark Law School's Refugee and Immigration Initiative, through which law students provide legal assistance to women and children detained in immigration detention centers in southern Texas. As a part of the initiative, law students travel to Texas for an intensive 1-week clinic in which they prepare detained women for interviews with asylum officers, help research for and draft immigration court documents, and provide other legal assistance. In 2017, second and third year law students recognized Dean Nunez as Professor of the Year. She is currently a member of the governing board of Better Days 2020, a nonprofit organization dedicated to popularizing Utah women's history, especially its early commitment to women's suffrage, to instill the legacy in Utah's future. She also sits on the governing board of the Utah Center for Legal Inclusion, is a member of the Association of American Law Schools Committee for Recruitment and Retention of Minority Law Teachers and Students, and was recently appointed a member of the Utah Advisory Committee for the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. She also served as a member of the founding governing board for the Utah chapter of the U.S. National Committee for UN Women, which supports international programs aimed at social, political, and economic equality for women and girls. A summa cum laude graduate of the Brigham Young University Law School and managing editor of the BYU Law Review, Dean Nunez clerked for the Honorable Fortuno P. Benavides. How do I say it? Benavides? Okay, whoa. Of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. She subsequently practiced commercial litigation at Stoll Reeves in Salt Lake City, Utah, and joined the BYU Law faculty in 2008. And we're so pleased to have you here today, Carolina.
So as you read that introduction, you exhausted me. I promise it is not, being a member of a board doesn't turn out to be quite as time intensive as it might seem. But these are all things that I'm passionate about, and a lot of them have to do with women and getting more visibility and integrating women into our community here. And so I was excited to be able to speak to you today. Before I go on and take you to Texas, I kind of wanted to start a little bit in Provo. As everybody's been talking today, I've been thinking a little bit about my connection to Provo. I don't think of myself as originally from Provo. I grew up in Venezuela. My mother is from the U.S., from southern Utah and Las Vegas, really. And my father's from Venezuela. And my father showed up when he was, I don't know, probably 20, 21 years old, here in Utah to go to BYU. He was not Mormon, didn't know anything about the Mormons, and in fact, really misunderstood what Provo might be like. And he likes to say that he arrived in Provo and couldn't even find a Coca-Cola at that time period in the 70s. He met my mom, and my mom was LDS, and they were married, and I was actually born in Provo here at Utah Valley Hospital. And a funny connection happened a few years ago when I had my last baby. She's 5 years old, so 5 years ago, I was in this hospital, and I was in the throes of labor, and I was ready for an epidural. I have no shame. I had 3 children. I had 3 epidurals, and those were the best decisions I made for me at that time. And I had sort of pushed this labor a little further without an epidural, but I was ready. So I told my husband, go get the anesthesiologist. I need this now. So the anesthesiologist came in, and he was a different anesthesiologist. I've come to know the anesthesiologist at Utah Valley Hospital, but this was a new one. I hadn't met him before, and he was a little bit older. And as we got talking, he said that this was going to be his last epidural, that he was retiring and he was going home, and this was it. This was the last one. And I asked him, well, how long have you been here? And he told me that he had started at the hospital, I think he said in September of 1979. And I was born in November of 1979. And I said, my mom got an epidural in November of 1979 at this hospital. And he said, I was the only anesthesiologist that did epidurals at the hospital. So he had been the anesthesiologist that had relieved my mother of her pain when I was born in Provo, and his final epidural, and my mother would have been one of the first that he had done, and my epidural that he did for me was one of the last. And one of the interesting things about it is that he was an immigrant. He had come to Provo, I think from, I can't remember, but I think he was from India, and had lived here all of his career. And so I sort of looked at myself, I'm sort of a semi-immigrant having this baby, and this immigrant who has this deep connection to Provo at this point is delivering my baby, who also delivered, in a way, me, right? And anesthetized my mom when she was delivering me. And I feel really, really intimately connected to Provo, even though I've only lived here since I went to college And then when I've come back here to join the faculty, Provo feels like home in a way that no other place in the world feels like home to me. So let's take a little journey from Provo to Texas. And I don't know, maybe Nisha, you know of this place, but I want to tell you a little bit about a town, if we could move to the next slide, called Dilley, Texas. There's no reason that you should have heard of Dilley, Texas. It is 90 miles, maybe only 80 miles southwest of San Antonio. And according to Wikipedia, it has just 4,300 residents. And it has a couple of claims to fame. It is not famous anyway, but it has a few claims to fame. And one of those is go back to the watermelon. Okay, so a slice of the good life. Apparently, they have thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds of watermelon harvested just outside of Dilley that gets transported to all these towns, grocery stores in southern Texas, and maybe further in, maybe into Austin, maybe to San Antonio, etc. The other thing that it's known for as well is as a petroleum town. So there's a lot of temporary housing that has gone up in Dilley, Texas, and a lot of people come and stay there for 6 weeks, 8 weeks to engage in the petroleum industry. There's a big fracking industry that goes around in Dilley, Texas, and it leaves around Dilley in the area, and it leaves the water tasting of fracking byproducts, and it's very much this sort of petroleum town, and you see lots of men in steel-toed boots and a lot of mud walking around in Dilley, Texas. So let's go to the next slide, and here you'll see me and a group of students and another faculty member in Dilley, Texas. This is at my favorite place to eat in Dilley, Bobby's Tacos. And Bobby makes really great tacos. He also takes really great photos. He took this photo for us. And you might wonder what we are doing here in Dilley. We are not in the petroleum industry, and it was not watermelon season. This was just 2.5 weeks ago. And what we do is we take groups of students, so a couple of colleagues and I take groups of students to Dilley because Dilley is the home of the largest immigration detention center of its kind. And if we can flip over to the next slide, this is a picture of it from the outside. This can house 2,000 people, all of them immigrant detainees. And the interesting thing about this detention center, there are a lot of detention centers in the US, but the interesting thing about this one is that it houses women and children exclusively. And this includes nursing babies, pregnant women, most of them from Central America. The Obama administration opened this detention center in 2014 to respond to an influx of families from Central America that were fleeing gang violence in Central America. These are large multinational gangs that have essentially taken over large swaths of these countries. It's Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, and are wreaking havoc in people's lives, in families' lives. And what we do is we take our students to this detention center and we listen to the women's stories of violence and the hardships that they've faced to help prepare them for their interviews with an asylum officer. And the stakes are super high. That interview with the asylum officer is the difference between getting to finish making a case for asylum in the United States or swift deportation, sometimes in the middle of the night right after you've failed that interview. Okay, so they're super, super high stakes. If we can go to the next slide. So we have all these women and children that we're working with in this detention center, and I'd like to tell you the story of one of the women that I met my very first time that I went to Dilley, and this was back in 2015, I think it was my first time when I went to Dilley. It was in the summer, and this was a sort of a shock for me. I have been working with immigration law for all of my career, but I had never actually been into a detention center. And it's funny how things that are very theoretical and abstract become very real and very difficult when you see how they actually work in practice. And I got to this detention center, and it's very much like a prison. Full security, couldn't take a phone in, couldn't do anything, in a visitation chamber, and then I would meet in a visitation room with a woman and consult with her about her case. And one of the women I met, and I won't tell you her name both because I don't remember it, and it's sort of this, I don't know what it says about about me, about the situation on the border, but I don't remember her name, and I wouldn't be able to tell it to you anyway for her confidentiality. But she told me about her life in Honduras. And she owned a little shop with her husband that sold basic food goods as well as convenience items. And then she and her family lived on the second story. It was a very typical setup for a business in Honduras. And they would every morning come downstairs, open the shop. She would take her 8-year-old daughter to school. Her 4-year-old daughter would go with her. And then she'd bring back her 4-year-old daughter. And she and her husband would just be in the shop selling goods and receiving their customers. Well, one day, they came home from an outing. I think it was from dropping off the 8-year-old at school to their shop, and someone had slipped a note under the door of the shop. And the husband grabbed the note, and he sort of hid it from her, and she was trying to look over the shoulder to read what it said, and she could see that it had a date and a time, and the time was noon, and that it had a money amount, so a figure, some numbers. And she said, "What is it? What is it?" And her husband said, don't worry, it was a prank. This is a prank." And he ripped it up and he threw it away. And she worried that there was something more sinister going on, but she trusted her husband, and in her culture, her husband made decisions about how things were going to go. And he said, "Just stop thinking about it, it's just a prank." About a week later, they had brought home, again, their 4-year-old after dropping off the 8-year-old at school, and about 10 minutes to noon, her husband said, "I want you to take our 4-year-old, I want you to go upstairs, lock the door, and don't come out until I personally tell you to come out." She did as she was told. And she went upstairs and she took her 4-year-old daughter and locked the door. And she waited. And she waited and she waited, and it was silent. And then she heard 4 gunshots. And she couldn't contain herself. She ran, she opened the door. As she started down the stairs, she looked to the scene below in the shop that she and her husband owned, and her husband was lying on the ground in a pool of blood. And 2 men were leaving, and one of them had a gun. And the man that had the gun turned around, saw her, and as he was running out the door, he said, "You're next." And the 4-year-old daughter ran down, and I always cry when I tell this part, but I'm just going to tell it anyway, and I'm going to get through it. The 4-year-old ran down to her father's side, and in her simple, childlike mind, she thought that if she could just put the blood back in her dad, that he would survive. And this mom was watching the scene while this 4-year-old was trying to save her dad, but it was much too late. So what did they do? They left the building, they left their home, and they never returned because she knew they would come back for them. She went north, and she went north for days and days and days, and she ended up paying all of the money that she got out of her bank account to be smuggled across the border to the United States, where she was immediately caught, and she was put in this detention center only because she had expressed a fear of return to her country. If she had not expressed a fear, she would have been immediately deported. And so we were there to give her advice and to help her be able to tell her story to an immigration officer so that the immigration officer would know whether she had any chance of making an asylum claim in the United States. So the story ends pretty well. She did get out of the detention center, and she is making a claim for asylum in the United States. Asylum is really hard to get here, so I am not confident that she will get asylum, but my hope is that in the time that she applies for asylum, that even if she does have to go back, that things will have calmed down for her in her hometown. And she wears an ankle monitor so that immigration officials know where she is at all times. So why am I starting this discussion with such a terrible, terrible story for you? And if we'll flip to the next slide, this is a picture inside of this detention center, and it's sort of this weird irony of having playgrounds, right, inside of the detention center. But what I have found over the last 4 years is that somehow these women who have seen the absolute worst that life can offer you are still looking forward to the future with hope and resiliency. I was just there 2.5 weeks ago, and a woman brought her daughter to me, and she said, "I want you to meet my daughter because she's going to be an attorney when she grows up." And I believed her. I think she will be an attorney when she grows up because this is a resilient population, a brave population. And when I tell you a little bit about what I've learned from them, if we can go to the next slide. So of course this is Provo. And I think some of the things that I've learned from these women in Dilley really actually is relevant to us in Provo. These women are going through some pretty difficult transitions. So when I talk about them being on the border, I don't just mean them being on the geographic border between the United States and Mexico and Central America or wherever it is that they have come from in the first instance. I really mean that they're crossing an enormous border in their life. It's a transition. And as women, I think back to my life, and it's still short. I still have a lot of life to live, I hope. And it's been full of transitions all the way from the beginning. I've transitioned from being a student to being an attorney. I've transitioned between different kinds of careers. I've transitioned into parenthood, and at some point I'll transition into an empty nester, and this brings all sorts of challenges. And as a community as a whole, I think we're also in a transition period. We have our first female mayor of Provo. We have our first female president of UVU. We just enrolled at BYU Law School for this last academic year, the first majority female class ever at BYU Law School. This is a huge transition for our community. And it's not the scary kind of transition that some of the women in this detention center are facing, but it's a transition nonetheless, and it brings its challenges. And there are two things that I've watched from the women in this detention center that I think can help us, both with our community transition and with individual transitions that we may have in our lives. So the first one, if we can move on to the next, is these women in the detention center are community builders. I am always amazed when I come out from a visitation room where I've talked to an individual client to see women in the waiting area talking to each other, crying with each other, holding each other's babies, wiping each other's babies' noses, and laughing even. And I can't understand how things could be okay in the circumstances that they are, but it's because they have built a community. And they build these communities very quickly. The average stay in one of these detention centers is between 1 week and 3 weeks, though some women do stay months with their children in this detention center. But they make friends, they find commonalities, even though they may be from different places and have never met, and they call each other friends. And I think this is really, really important for us in our community. Building community helps us become more resilient. And there are lots of people doing this. We have a lot of organizations and initiatives, past ones, present ones, that are building community here. I could have put on here all sorts of things. I could have put the Provo Girls Summit. I could put a lot of other things, but these are some that came to mind. MWEG, Mormon Women for Ethical Government. This has women at its helm, obviously, and I don't know if you've ever heard Charlie tell the story of how MWEG came to be, but this was very organic, and it came from a transition in which women were concerned about government and were looking for some kind of community, and it came together because women made it come together. Likewise, with Encircle, this is something right here in our community where someone noticed that we needed a community to help precisely with resilience of our LGBTQ youth. And a woman is at the helm of that as well. And women are at the helm of the others that we have here. Let's move on to the next one. Another thing that I think is integral, and nothing I'm saying here is new, right? Andy and Astrid and Nisha have talked about all of these things. Women at the detention center are resilient when they tell their stories. And that is really what we are helping them do as we arrive at the detention center. They are telling their stories, and we're helping them understand which parts of their stories are relevant to the law and which part are not. And that's a painful process because I don't want to tell a woman that's not relevant, right? Your story is irrelevant. It's absolutely relevant to your life, but what we're trying to do is figure out what it is that you need to tell the asylum officer. But I have watched as women have physically transformed when they tell their story to somebody else, and somebody is there to witness and listen and believe that story. And telling stories is an integral part of building resilience in communities and in individuals. This dynamic is actually very similar to a dynamic that researchers have identified in children. A couple of researchers at Emory University came up with a hypothesis that children who had stories told to them about their family would be more resilient in the face of trauma. So in the late 1990s, they ran an experiment where they took a bunch of different families and they sent out surveys to these families to have their children take the surveys. And the questions were, where did your grandparents meet? Or where were they born? Where did your parents meet? Just sort of stories about family history. And what did they find? They found that the children who knew more of the answers to those questions, and here's the important part, didn't even have to be accurate, right? It was that they believed that they knew the answers to the questions, were more resilient to trauma. And then something happened in 2001, on September 11th. There was a lot of trauma. And these researchers decided to go back to these same children and see how they were doing. And it turned out that the children, again, who knew more about their family history and knew stories about their family, were more resilient in the face of the trauma that they were witnessing unfold on the news. And if you'll recall, this was the 24-hour terrorist attack news cycle. And I've seen that work in my own family's life. We like to tell stories in our family, and we have a variety of stories. And I'm recognizing that a lot of those stories are actually stories of bad things that happened to our family, but how we sort of got over them. And I want to share one of those stories. It's lighter, it's lighthearted, but I think it illustrates this concept. My family, we love to travel. When my husband and I got married, we made a pact that we would visit one new country every year, at least. And then when I was pregnant, people said, oh, your traveling days are over. You won't because you have children. So then we said, well, now we really have to travel to show these people, right? So we take our children every other year. We go without the children on half of the years, and the other half we take our children with us. Well, one year we decided we were going to do a fantastic road trip through Portugal and Spain with our kids. And we had done a road trip with our kids in France, and it had been lovely. But this was different. So we arrived in Portugal, and I remember arriving in Lisbon, and we rented a car, and everything had gone wrong in every possible way in the first 2 days of the trip. And I looked at a map, and I said, I have to get these kids from Lisbon, my husband and I have to get these kids from Lisbon to Barcelona, which was our flight back to the US. Like, that's all I have to do. I have to get to Barcelona on time for the flight to get home, because this has been a wild ride so far. Along the way, we were stopping in a small town in Spain, and we were lost, and the roads were like this wide, and our car was this wide, and we were getting stuck in the roads, and we had just gone to McDonald's, and who eats at McDonald's in Spain? Well, we do, because our kids demanded French fries and chicken nuggets, and my son in the back said, I'm feeling kind of sick as we're winding through these little roads. And I said, well, you're going to be okay. We've got to find this vacation rental house that we've rented out here in the middle of nowhere. And my son said, no, and then he threw up, right? And I rushed, and I put this McDonald's paper bag underneath so that he threw up on the paper bag. And we stopped the car, and I burst into tears, and the road is only this wide, and everybody's leaning out their windows watching what we do. I get out of the car, there are people, Spaniards, asking if I need help, and I'm like, I don't need help, I need to go home, right? And I come around, open the door, and I gently lift the paper bag holding the contents of my son's stomach, and I lift it over, and as I'm lifting it over my youngest, who's in a car seat, the paper bag breaks, and everything falls onto my 9-month-old. And then the worst thing I could ever imagine happened, which was my 9-month-old put her finger in it and ate it. And I just was like screaming at this point. And these people are watching over. And I speak Spanish, I'm fluent. But this accent in this little town in Spain is like nothing I've ever heard. I don't know what they're saying, but I'm just crying, I'm screaming. And we have this saying in our house, which is in 2 weeks, sometimes we use 2 months, so I'll use 2 months because that's what it took. In 2 months, this will be funny. And it is, and we tell that story all the time to each other. And here was the really interesting piece of the research, that it's not always the great stories that help the children be more resilient. The narratives that help children be more resilient are the ones that go up and down, Families have ups and downs. And it's not necessarily that it's all about family, it's about community. So this is the way in which storytelling also feeds into this other piece about building community. If we tell our stories, we can find our commonalities, and we can hear our differences in their contexts. We can understand where those differences come from and appreciate them. But this means for us today on Women's Day that we have to listen to each other's stories. Okay? We have to listen to women's stories. These are two organizations that are run by women who have ties to our community right here in Utah County. Better Days 2020, I'd like to tell you a little bit about. Better Days 2020 is aimed at popularizing women's history. Utah was the first to have women vote. Utah had a lot of firsts for women. And if you read any of the most recent studies about women in education in Utah, women in political participation in Utah, you might not have guessed this history. But I think if we understand our history and if we can tell the stories of our early women in Utah, that we can make that legacy come to life today. And I've seen it happen with Better Days 2020. Better Days 2020 has created curriculum for our schools, so our school children, our school girls, are getting information about what happened in Utah and women who participated in Utah and made a difference in Utah. And hopefully that'll help our girls look for and recognize the women that are making changes in Utah today. So let me take you back to Dilley. This is a little statue of a watermelon that still is in Dilley. This picture is, I think, from the early 70s. So they've had a lot of pride about their watermelon for a long time. So something interesting happened as I was just pulling up some facts about Dilley yesterday. To me, Dilley is a town where women are anonymous. There's a detention center full of women and children, and I don't even remember their names, and I can't tell their names, and the residents of Dilley wouldn't know their names. Dilley is a town full of petroleum workers who are, for the most part, men, who are easily seen. They're big, and they're walking around, and they're in shops, and I don't see a lot of women, and I don't know a lot of women in Dilley, Texas. And as I was looking at some details about this town on Wikipedia, I noticed something really fascinating. If you can switch to the next one. There are 3 schools in Dilley, and there's the Dilley High School, there's the Dilley Elementary School, and there's the Mary Harper Middle School. And I thought, there's a story there. So I started searching on the internet to find out about Mary Harper, and there is not a word about Mary Harper on the internet. Not a single word, and I've been keeping myself glued to the chair because I wanted to step out and call Mary Harper Middle School before I had to speak to you and say, who is Mary Harper? Tell me about her. I haven't done it, but I'm going to do it, and I'm going to suggest that they put that on their school page. It's not enough to name buildings for our women, and frankly, it's not enough just to tell their stories. The value that stories have is that they cause us to do something else. For me, the stories have caused me to return to Dilley to help a segment of our population here in the country that desperately needs help. The stories are what have caused my students to come back to Dilley to do the same thing. And I think that if we use our stories to build community here in Provo, that we can be a more resilient community and that we can grow, and that this modern version of Provo will be something better than our history, but we will use our history to get there. So if you have any questions, I'd be very happy to answer them. No questions? Yes, go ahead.
What do you see as a solution to resolving the issues at the border and with
So I don't have a good 1-minute answer, but I will say that it's a really complicated situation. I think the best thing to do first is if we have honest conversations about actual facts. I have found that every voice has a different set of facts about what is happening. I read the news and I see so many inaccuracies about what's going on, and I think if we're honest about what's going on, that's the only way we're ever going to be able to talk about it. So the first thing is just education about both the law and the facts on the ground. Yes?
Why
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So as far as an education, this is a hard question. It's really hard. I would say come take my immigration law class, but not everyone can do that. As far as getting facts and figures, the actual website for the Department of Homeland Security and Customs and Border Patrol and ICE, they have figures there, and they tell the story, right? And a lot of times the story is surprising. So our undocumented border crossings, for example, in 2017 and 2018 were lower than they've been since like the 70s. And most people wouldn't believe that, but those are the figures, right? Is there a surge right now happening at the border? Well, it depends what you mean by a surge. This month, do we have higher numbers than we've had? February was high. Yeah, we had a high number of undocumented border crossers in February. Is the year going to be abnormally high? So far, it doesn't look like it, but who knows, right? And I think we just have to be honest about facts and figure out what's going on. As far as where to go to volunteer, there are a lot of local organizations dedicated to helping refugees who are already here or refugees who've already completed the asylum process. There's a new one here in Utah County, and they're looking for long-term volunteers. So we have a lot of short-term volunteers because BYU students love to volunteer and then go home. And we need people who are here, and this is home. They're in the middle of a name change, so I don't have their name for you. But if you contact me via email, I should know their name in the next month. They're going through a 501c3 name change. So, anything else? Yeah.
What is to be done internationally? The root of the problem seems to be the problems are there, and from a legal perspective, who's going after that? What's being done to get to that where the problem begins with the violence?
So that's a really tricky question because the governments have been incapable of stopping this gang activity in these countries. An interesting piece of information is that both of these gangs originated in the United States. There's two main gangs, and they both originated in the United States. After civil war in those countries, sent a lot of people to the United States from those countries, and then we put them in prison or detention centers, and a lot of criminal activity actually starts in prisons. And so they started there. Then we had a mass deportation in the 80s, and we sent people back. In the 80s and 90s, sent people back, and it seems to be those same people who were in prison here have managed to spread the organizations there. I don't have any answers for how to fix that. That's a really complicated problem. I agree. I think the Organization of American States has that on the forefront, but I don't know, but it's a really good question. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think just one more, and this will be the last one. Yes? So they still have that? Okay, perfect. Perfect. Thank you for that. All right, thanks, everybody.
We are so glad that you've been here with us today. I want to thank everyone for attending and participating, and I want to remind you of a couple of things that are going on for the rest of the day. First of all, please make sure that you take your bookmark and think about accomplishing some of the tasks on that bookmark. And if you are interested in joining the city's book club, you can do that out at the main entrance at the, what's the table called? At the welcome table. So just right outside this door. For the rest of the day, there are several activities going on. First of all, Imagine Learning is sponsoring a lunch and learn at noon, and they have a really great speaker lineup. Sarah Jane of Sarah Jane Studios will be speaking, Julie Franklin of the BYU Director of Residence Life, and Suzanne Hendricks, President of Pantera Corporation. Again, bring your own lunch and hear the speakers that they have lined up. There's also an opportunity to do yoga at the Yoga Underground at noon. You can join them for an invigorating, rejuvenating yoga flow that will stretch your mind and body and help you to heal from the inside out. This class will be perfect for beginners and for seasoned practitioners. You can also, is this still happening? You can also meet at the Provo Bicycle Collective at 3:30. and see what happens. But what's probably happening is there's probably a ladies' bike ride still. You can bring friends and family to the bike ride, and you can stop with friends after at a local bakery or a local coffee shop to grab something. And last but not least, tonight there is an after party. It's at the Provo Recreation Center, and there's going to be a DJ, there'll be henna body art, there'll be a book corner, a fortune teller, and so much more. There'll be mocktails, hors d'oeuvres, gelatos, crepes, pretzel cart, a fruit stand, and Pop Zero. The first 100 people that show up will receive a fiber optic sparkler for the perfect send-off. So make sure that you get there early so that you can get your door prize. And you can get your tickets for that still at ProvoWomen'sDay.com. We want to thank our sponsors, Swire Coca-Cola, Google Fiber, and Pop Zero. Without these sponsors, these types of events wouldn't be possible. And last but not least, I want to make sure that I thank the other people that served on the committee, the Provo Women's Day Committee, and especially the mayor for inviting us to have this opportunity to think about what might be interesting for you. And just happy Provo Women's Day and International Women's Day. Thanks for being here.